Hi, Grace Judson here, self-proclaimed, proud leadership geek, and as usual on a mission to help new managers become good leaders. And today I want to talk about change. Change is a constant, obviously, and it seems to be getting faster and faster these days. No surprise there either, and it's hard. If you've ever had to work through a strategic change initiative at work, whether they called it strategic or something else, you know what I mean. But what you might not know is that up to 70% of change initiatives fail, either outright or over time. They're not sustainable. And that's why I'm here to talk about how to make change work, how to make it easier, how to support your team in getting through change with less stress and less resistance. And first, yay, you're here, because I really work to put out the most relevant and useful leadership advice for new managers and supervisors. So if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit the little notifications bell so you'll be informed when I publish a new video every week. And meanwhile, if you are the manager responsible for creating or supporting some sort of change, whether it's about the company culture, some new software system being implemented, something even bigger than that, like a merger with another company, you know how hard it is. I know how hard it is too. I was in management and leadership for over 16 years before I started my training and coaching business in 2005, working to support, like I said, new managers so they can become good leaders. One of my big success stories as a leader was creating a change that most of my fellow division and department heads didn't want, but which I was able to complete in such a way that years later, after I left the company, people who were still there were telling me what a great thing it was for everyone. So, how did I do it? Great question. And before I get into it, I'd love to hear what changes you're dealing with in your company. It could be anything. Like I said, from a new software system, moving to a new building. I had some clients a year or so ago where they were remodeling their workspace and had to move to another building. Maybe you're figuring out how to deal with a new manager, or there's leadership changes at the executive level. Post a comment down below and let me know. You can just give me a yeah in the comments if you've had to deal with a tough change challenge in the past. Okay. Change leadership is a big topic. I teach workshops on this at a minimum of a full hour, and even then I am only touching on the very basic. So what I'm going to give you here are just a few highlights on how to reduce resistance to change and help people get past their anxiety and fears about it so they can get on with doing what needs to be done. And stay with me, because by the end, after I've laid some groundwork, I'm going to give you one truly transformational question that you can ask anyone who's dealing with changes, who's maybe emotionally reactive about the changes, that can work wonders on how they move forward. Very simply, change is scary. It's scary because, by definition, you're venturing into the unknown. We don't know how things are going to be. So some of the things that people worry about are, will I still be able to do my job? What am I going to have to learn? Can I learn it? Will I enjoy it? Will this new boss coming in like me? Am I going to get fired or laid off? I think a lot of the stress around change is that it is often associated with layoffs. So that's a big one, right? And so on. And this is normal. It's the reason why people resist change, but it's normal. And they may not even be consciously aware that they're resisting. It's not sabotage, it's just resistance, right? So does this sound familiar? Have you had times when you were being asked to do things differently at work, even if just in some small ways, and some of these types of worries crossed your mind? Drop a comment, let me know. Just like I said earlier, just a yes will tell me and everyone else that this really is normal. And it's nothing to be ashamed of, embarrassed about, or to really fight with too much, because there are ways of managing this, which I'm going to get into in just a second, so that you don't have to make it into a big struggle. So a few years ago, I had a conversation with someone, let's just say they called themselves a business consultant, and I put it that way, called themselves, because they told me, and I quote, that they advised clients to just go ahead with the change. Don't bother to tell people about it because that just gets everybody riled up. Just go ahead and do it. I can't think of anything worse to do, anything more likely to create anxious, upset employees who are going to resist the change just because they're so anxious about it. So the first thing you need to do in order to help people feel less anxious and less resistant is communicate. Tell them what's going on multiple times in multiple ways: email, one-to-one meetings, group meetings, phone messages, text messages, whatever other tools you use. Maybe you use Slack and so on. Over communicate. It's the only way you'll actually reach everyone and help everyone understand. Because once people understand more about what's happening, they'll start feeling less anxious. But not entirely. At least some of those fears that I listed earlier, maybe a lot of them are still going to be hanging on. And the big problem with this is that there's still this ongoing myth that we can leave our emotions behind when we come to work. You know, hang them on a peg at the door and pick them up again on the way out. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work. We're human, and that means we have emotions. In fact, emotions are so much a part of how we operate. Study after study has shown that we can't even make decisions if we have somehow become disconnected from our emotional processing centers, whether mental illness or brain injury or whatever it may be. We make decisions emotionally first, and then we justify them logically. So if you want people to move forward with a change, you have to allow them to have the emotional experience around it. Okay, how do you get them through and past the anxiety and fear? Great question. A year or so ago, I was on a panel with a couple of other women on, you guessed it, change management and change leadership. And at the end, the way panels usually work, we were taking audience questions, and one woman from the audience stood up and asked exactly the question we're looking at here. How do I deal with my employees' resistance to change? I was on the end of the row, so the other women on the panel answered first, and they gave great answers. They talked about communication, which I've just emphasized the importance of, about making it clear that what the end result would be, why it was a good thing, all of that. Clearly, obviously, I agreed with everything they said. And then it was my turn. And here's what I said and what I want you to pay attention to. Yes, communicate, absolutely. Tell them all the things. But before you can expect them to dive in and commit to helping create the change, you have to give them time for their emotional reaction. Because when someone is in an emotionally reactive state, they cannot process the logic of all those ways the change is going to be a good thing. And I will prove it to you. I'll bet there have been times when you've been upset about something and some well-meaning, trying to be helpful person has said things like, calm down, you're overreacting. It's all going to be okay. Here's what you need to do to fix this. And I would be willing to bet that you got more upset, not less. That's because you were not ready to hear any of the logic. You might have woken up the next morning or a few days later and thought, you know what, they were right. But at that time, they actually weren't right. And when your employees are in the middle of that anxious point that happens when change is coming down the pike, they're not ready to hear the logic either. So here is the transformational question I promised you in the beginning. And it directly addresses this problem of people not being ready to hear the logic behind what's happening. Ready? Ask them, what's the worst thing about this for you? This is transformational for two simple reasons. One, when you ask sincerely, and you must ask sincerely, they'll know if you're just, checking a box on a to-do list. It shows them that you're not trying to convince them to do anything. You're not denying the fact that they're anxious or upset about the change. They feel like you are not just willing, but you actually are listening to them. Second, you are asking them to evaluate their emotional experience. In the midst of all the crappy things that they're dealing with because of this change, you're not denying it. You're not arguing about it. You're asking them to perform a logical function, compare and contrast all those things to identify the worst. So in having to do a logical brain function, they immediately start to come up out of the emotional reactivity, but not because you've argued them into it or because you've logicked them into it, but because you have offered them genuine expression of your care about what they're going through. So when you have their answer, you can begin to help them find ways to resolve their sense of anxiety around whatever it is. This is a huge topic, and I have just barely touched the surface on it, as you can probably tell. I have a couple of papers that talk about change initiatives and why they work and why, more often, why they don't work. I will leave those links down below in the description on this video. If you like this video, please let me know by clicking that thumbs up icon below. So make sure you're subscribed, share it with your colleagues who may be going through some kind of a change initiative, and by all means, leave a comment with any questions you have or any insights or aha moments you had. Good luck with your change initiatives. Take care. See you next time.